Some people think they can recognize justice just by looking at a face. They're usually wrong. The first rays of a cool October morning stretched across the Greyhound bus station in downtown Richmond, Virginia, painting long shadows over rows of metal benches and polished concrete floors still damp from the night before. Travelers hurried toward departure gates with paper coffee cups in hand. Parents counted luggage while children chased one another beneath glowing departure boards, and the distant rumble of diesel engines blended with the soft announcements echoing through the terminal. It looked like any ordinary Tuesday, the kind of morning that would disappear from memory before sunset. But before the clocks reached 9, this station would become the stage for a moment no one present would ever forget. Judge Andre Washington stepped through the main entrance carrying a worn leather briefcase in one hand and a black garment bag carefully folded over his other arm. At 56 years old, Andre carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needed to prove who he was. His charcoal suit was neatly pressed, his silver tie perfectly centered, and his polished shoes reflected the overhead lights as he crossed the lobby without drawing attention to himself. Inside the garment bag rested the judicial robe he planned to wear later that morning during a statewide ceremony welcoming newly appointed judges in a public service. He had insisted on traveling without an escort despite repeated offers from court security, believing that public servants should remain connected to the people they served. It was a habit he had never abandoned, even after years on the bench. As he paused beside a large station map to confirm the departure time for a regional shuttle, he noticed an elderly couple struggling with 2 oversized suitcases near the entrance. Without hesitation, Andre placed his own briefcase on a nearby bench and walked over with a warm smile. "Allow me," he said gently, lifting one of the heavy bags with practiced ease before helping the couple wheel both cases toward the ticket counter. They thanked him with genuine appreciation, never realizing the man helping them would soon preside over one of the highest courts in the state. Andre simply nodded, wished them safe travels, and returned to collect his belongings. The garment bag rested exactly where he had left it, its zipper slightly open, just enough to reveal the edge of a neatly folded black robe trimmed with simple judicial stitching. Across the terminal, Officer Tyler Grayson had been watching. Standing near the security checkpoint with a fresh cup of coffee and the confidence that came with years wearing a badge, Tyler scanned the crowd with quick, practiced glances. Most mornings passed without incident, but something about the man in the tailored suit carrying what looked like an official robe caught his attention. His eyes lingered longer than necessary. He watched Andre straighten the garment bag with unusual care before calmly checking the departure board again. Tyler narrowed his gaze, a skeptical smile slowly forming across his face. To him, nothing about the scene made sense. A black man carrying what appeared to be a judge's robe through a busy bus station seemed, in his mind, too unusual to accept without suspicion. He set his coffee down, adjusted the radio clipped to his shoulder, and began walking across the terminal with measured steps, never imagining that within minutes his assumptions would collide with a truth far greater than his certainty. Officer Tyler Grayson stopped less than 6 feet away from Andre Washington, folding his arms as his eyes settled on the black garment bag. The steady flow of passengers continued around them, but several people instinctively slowed their pace, sensing that an ordinary conversation was about to become something else. Tyler forced a tight smile that carried more judgment than courtesy. "Good morning, sir. Mind telling me what you're carrying in that bag?" Andre met the officer's eyes without hesitation. "Certainly. It contains my judicial robe." Tyler let out a short laugh that immediately drew a few curious glances from nearby travelers. "Your judicial robe?" he repeated, shaking his head. "That is a pretty creative answer." Andre remained composed. "It is simply the truth." Tyler stepped closer, his expression growing more skeptical. "You expect me to believe that?" Andre answered with the same calm tone. "I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm only answering your question honestly." The officer circled slightly, studying the garment bag as though it concealed something suspicious. "You know, Halloween is still weeks away." A young college student standing near the ticket machines looked up from his phone. An elderly veteran waiting for his bus quietly turned his head. Even the station employee cleaning the lobby slowed her work for a moment. Tyler pointed toward the partially visible black fabric inside the bag. Looks more like a costume than anything official. Andre gently rested one hand on the handle of the garment bag. I would appreciate it if you would not refer to it that way. Tyler smirked. Why? Because you spent good money renting it. A few uncomfortable chuckles echoed from the edge of the crowd, while others simply watched in silence. Andre did not react to the laughter. Years inside courtrooms had taught him that dignity often spoke louder than emotion. That robe represents the responsibility to uphold the law, he replied. It deserves respect. Tyler tilted his head with obvious disbelief. Respect is earned, not purchased online. Without waiting for another response, he gestured toward a nearby security table. Set the bag down. Andre complied without protest, carefully placing both the garment bag and his leather briefcase on the stainless steel surface. Every movement remained deliberate, measured, and respectful. Tyler slowly unzipped the garment bag, revealing the neatly folded black judicial robe resting inside. The embroidered seal stitched near the collar briefly caught the overhead lights. Instead of examining it carefully, Tyler gave another dismissive laugh. I have seen better costumes at community theater. Andre quietly replied, Please handle it with care. Relax, Tyler answered. If it is fake, it can survive a little inspection. His words carried through the terminal, attracting even more attention. Several passengers quietly reached for their phones, uncertain whether they were witnessing an official investigation or an unnecessary confrontation. Andre noticed the cameras but never acknowledged them. His attention remained fixed on the officer. His breathing stayed steady. His shoulders never tensed. There was no anger in his expression, only disappointment. He understood that arguing would accomplish nothing. Facts would eventually speak for themselves. Tyler continued searching through the briefcase and removed several neatly organized folders stamped with official court markings. He barely glanced at them before setting them aside. Anybody with a printer can make documents look impressive, he said confidently. Andre answered with remarkable patience. Officer, there is still time to end this conversation professionally. Tyler looked directly at him, convinced that he had already figured everything out. No, he said firmly. I think I am finally getting to the truth. The silence that followed lingered heavier than the noise of the station itself. People continued walking past, but fewer were focused on catching their buses. More eyes drifted toward the security table where the conversation had become impossible to ignore. Andre Washington stood with both hands resting calmly in front of him, neither defensive nor confrontational. His composure seemed almost out of place in a moment growing increasingly uncomfortable. Tyler Grayson interpreted that calmness as confidence born from deception rather than dignity. He picked up one of the folders and flipped through several pages without taking the time to understand what he was reading. Official court schedules, judicial correspondence, and ceremonial programs all carried matching seals and signatures, yet none of it seemed to matter to him. He closed the folder with a dismissive motion and looked directly at Andre. You have gone through a lot of trouble putting this together. Andre answered quietly. Those documents are public records. You may verify every one of them. Tyler smiled as though he had just heard another excuse. That is exactly what someone running a scam would say. A young woman wearing a law school sweatshirt stepped a little closer from the ticket counter. She studied Andre's face with growing curiosity. There was something familiar about him. She had seen that calm expression before, perhaps during a guest lecture or in an article discussing judicial reform. The memory sat just beyond her reach. Before she could place it, Tyler spoke again. Do you have any actual identification proving this story? Andre slowly reached inside his jacket pocket. Yes. He carefully removed a leather credential holder and presented it with both hands. Tyler accepted it, opened it briefly, then frowned. The identification clearly displayed Andre's name and judicial title, complete with an official seal. Instead of examining its security features, Tyler immediately questioned its authenticity. Another impressive fake. Andre replied without changing his tone. If you contact the courthouse, they will confirm everything within minutes. Tyler handed the credential back without making any attempt to verify it. I do not need someone else to tell me what I can already see. Nearby, the elderly veteran who had been waiting quietly on a bench exchanged concerned glances with another passenger. He had spent decades serving under people who believed facts mattered more than assumptions. Watching this exchange left him uneasy. Across the terminal, several smartphones remained pointed toward the scene. Nobody shouted. Nobody interrupted. They simply recorded. Andre noticed each camera, but never acknowledged them. He understood that moments like this often revealed more than words ever could. Tyler zipped the garment bag halfway before tapping the folded robe with the back of his hand. You know what this looks like to me? Andre remained silent. Tyler answered his own question. It looks like someone trying very hard to convince strangers he belongs somewhere he does not. For the first time, a faint sadness crossed Andre's face. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Officer, he said softly, every decision we make becomes part of our character. Some decisions also become part of the public record. Tyler dismissed the comment with a shrug. Save the speeches. He reached for his radio and requested a routine records check, speaking with complete confidence that dispatch would soon support his judgment. As the transmission echoed through the terminal, Andre glanced briefly toward the large station clock. The ceremony he was scheduled to attend would begin in less than 1 hour. He had promised the newest judges that he would deliver the opening remarks personally. Missing that commitment disappointed him far more than the accusations being directed at him. Even now, he hoped the misunderstanding would end before anyone else was forced into an embarrassing situation. He still believed professionalism could prevail. Tyler, however, believed he had already uncovered the truth, never realizing that every passing second was quietly moving the morning toward a revelation that no amount of confidence could prevent. Dispatch responded more quickly than Tyler Grayson expected, but not with the answer he wanted. The voice coming through his radio was calm and professional. Officer Grayson, we are unable to verify the identification through our mobile system at this time. The judicial database appears to be temporarily offline for scheduled maintenance. Tyler looked up with quiet satisfaction. To him, the delayed verification only confirmed his growing suspicion. He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder and folded his arms. Convenient timing, he said. Looks like your little story just hit a dead end. Andre Washington answered without the slightest sign of frustration. Technology experiences delays. The truth does not. Tyler ignored the remark. Instead, he carefully examined the leather credential holder once more before placing it beside the garment bag. Around them, the crowd had nearly doubled. Travelers who had intended to board buses now stood at a respectful distance, whispering among themselves. A mother quietly pulled her young son closer, not out of fear, but because she sensed they were witnessing something important. The law student continued studying Andre's face. Then, almost instinctively, she opened her backpack, removed a legal notebook, and began flipping through several pages covered with handwritten notes from a judicial conference she had attended the previous spring. Her eyes moved rapidly across the names until they suddenly stopped. She looked back toward Andre, then down at the notebook again. Her heartbeat quickened. She was almost certain she knew exactly who he was, but uncertainty kept her silent. Tyler reached into the briefcase once more, removing a thick envelope embossed with the official seal of the Virginia Judicial Conference. He barely glanced at the lettering before speaking again. More impressive props, Andre replied quietly. That envelope contains today's ceremony agenda. Tyler gave a dismissive shrug. Anyone can print a fancy envelope. Without opening it, he set it aside with the other documents, treating each official item as though it carried no more significance than ordinary paper. The station manager, Linda Carter, finally approached after receiving several concerned comments from passengers. "Officer, is everything all right?" she asked politely. Tyler nodded with complete confidence. "Routine investigation." Linda looked toward Andre. His expression remained remarkably composed despite the growing attention surrounding him. There was no anger in his face, only patience. She had managed the station for nearly 15 years and had learned to recognize the difference between panic and quiet certainty. Something about the gentleman standing before her made her hesitate before walking away. Meanwhile, another passenger uploaded a short video to social media. Within minutes, thousands of people began watching a silent recording showing a well-dressed black man calmly standing beside a security table while an officer questioned the authenticity of what appeared to be a judicial robe. The comments multiplied by the second. Some defended the officer. Others questioned why no verification call had been made directly to the courthouse. Back inside the terminal, none of that was visible yet. Time continued moving forward one steady minute at a time. Andre glanced once more toward the station clock. Less than 45 minutes remained before the opening ceremony. He quietly thought about the young judges waiting to begin careers devoted to fairness, accountability, and public trust. He had planned to remind them that justice depended not only upon written law, but also upon humility. The irony was impossible to ignore. Tyler stepped closer again, convinced that hesitation would only allow deception to continue. "Until I know exactly who you are," he said firmly, "you are staying right here." Andre met his gaze with calm, unwavering eyes. "Officer Grayson," he answered softly, "the question has never been whether you know who I am. The question is whether you are willing to find out before reaching your conclusion." Across the city, the grand marble entrance of the Virginia Judicial Conference buzzed with quiet anticipation. Newly appointed judges greeted one another with respectful smiles, while court administrators reviewed the morning schedule for the final time. Inside the main auditorium, every seat had been prepared with a printed program bearing one name in bold letters beneath the opening address: Judge Andre Washington. At precisely 8:25 in the morning, Chief Judge Harold Whitmore checked his watch for the third time. Andre had never arrived late to a judicial event in more than 2 decades. Harold reached for his phone and placed another call. It went unanswered. His assistant frowned as she lowered her own phone. "Still no response, Your Honor." Harold stood silently for a moment before making a decision. "Contact court security. Ask whether anyone has seen Judge Washington since he left the courthouse." Within minutes, several calls spread through administrative offices. Clerks checked schedules. Security officers reviewed departure logs. One deputy marshal remembered Andre mentioning that he planned to travel through the downtown bus station before meeting another judge at the conference. Harold immediately turned toward his chief marshal. "We are leaving now." Back at the station, none of those conversations were visible. Tyler Grayson remained convinced that patience would eventually expose what he believed was an elaborate deception. He leaned against the security table while occasionally glancing toward Andre, who remained standing with remarkable composure despite the growing crowd surrounding them. The law student could no longer ignore what she remembered. Gathering enough courage, she stepped forward carefully. "Excuse me, sir," she said to Andre. "Did you speak at the Constitutional Ethics Symposium at the University of Virginia last April?" Andre smiled politely. "Yes, I did." Her eyes widened immediately. She opened her notebook to a page filled with handwritten observations. At the very top, she had carefully written the name of the keynote speaker, Judge Andre Washington. She looked from a notebook to the man standing before her and back again. "I knew I recognized you." Tyler interrupted before she could continue. "Miss, please step back. We are conducting official business." She hesitated. "Officer, I attended his lecture. I'm almost certain he really is." Tyler raised one hand politely but firmly. "Almost certain is not evidence." The young woman reluctantly stepped back, although uncertainty had now begun spreading through the crowd. Several passengers quietly searched Andre's name online using their phones. Unfortunately, the station's wireless network struggled under the morning traffic, leaving pages loading slowly or failing altogether. Tyler noticed the delays and interpreted them as further confirmation that nothing could be verified. Linda Carter received a call on the station office telephone. After listening for several seconds, Her expression changed. "Yes," she answered carefully. "He is still here." Tyler glanced toward her, but remained focused on Andre. Linda ended the call and approached slowly. "Officer Grayson," she said, "someone from the courthouse is asking whether there has been an incident involving a judge traveling through the station this morning." Tyler barely reacted. "Tell them we are handling a routine investigation." Linda nodded politely, but did not move immediately. Something about the urgency in the caller's voice lingered in her thoughts. Outside the terminal, the distant sound of several approaching vehicles gradually became noticeable above the morning traffic. Most people ignored it. Andre simply lifted his eyes toward the front entrance for a brief moment before looking back at Tyler. His expression never changed. He had made no dramatic declarations, offered no threats, and demanded no special treatment. He had trusted that truth would arrive on its own schedule. And as the first dark government vehicle slowly turned into the station entrance, that schedule was finally beginning to catch up with everyone inside. The sound of engines rolling into the station parking lot gradually silenced the scattered conversations inside the terminal. One by one, 4 dark government vehicles came to a controlled stop near the main entrance. Their appearance was not dramatic, yet the precision of their arrival immediately drew attention. Several men and women dressed in professional business attire stepped out alongside uniformed court security officers. They moved with quiet purpose rather than urgency, scanning the station before entering through the automatic glass doors. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Linda Carter recognized the official court insignias on their jackets before anyone else did. Her heart sank as she realized the earlier phone call had been only the beginning. At the center of the group walked Chief Judge Harold Whitmore, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression calm but unmistakably serious. Beside him was Chief Court Marshal Rebecca Lawson, followed by several administrative officials carrying folders and communication tablets. The conversations throughout the terminal faded into complete silence as the delegation walked directly toward the security table without hesitation. Tyler Grayson noticed the approaching group and instinctively straightened his uniform. He assumed they had arrived to assist with what he believed was a routine investigation. "Good morning," Tyler said confidently. "Can I help you?" Harold Whitmore looked directly at him, but did not answer immediately. His attention shifted past the officer toward Andre Washington, who still stood patiently beside the table exactly where he had been for nearly an hour. The chief judge's expression softened with visible relief. "Judge Washington," he said warmly, "we have been trying to reach you." Andre offered a respectful nod. "I apologize for the delay, Harold. Circumstances changed unexpectedly." Several people in the crowd exchanged stunned glances. The law student quietly covered her mouth, realizing her memory had been completely accurate. Tyler frowned, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. Harold stepped forward until he stood beside Andre. "We were concerned when you did not arrive for the ceremony. The entire conference is waiting for your opening address." Without another word, Chief Marshal Rebecca Lawson opened a protective garment case brought by one of her staff members. She carefully removed a freshly pressed judicial robe and held it respectfully in both hands. Andre smiled politely. "Thank you, Rebecca, although my robe is right here." He glanced toward the garment bag, still resting on the security table. Rebecca followed his eyes and immediately noticed it had been left partially unzipped among scattered documents. She carefully picked it up as though handling an important historical artifact. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "is this the robe you wore during last year's constitutional session?" Andre nodded once. "It is." Rebecca gently brushed a small crease from the sleeve before handing it back to him with unmistakable respect. Tyler's confidence began slipping away. His eyes moved from Harold Whitmore to Rebecca Lawson, then back to Andre. Every person standing before him clearly knew the man he had spent the morning questioning. Nobody appeared surprised by Andre's identity. They were surprised only that he was still standing inside the station. Harold finally turned toward Tyler. His voice remained calm, measured, and professional. "Officer, this is Judge Andre Washington of the Virginia Court of Appeals." He has served the people of this commonwealth with distinction for many years. No accusation followed. No raised voice broke the silence. Those simple words carried enough weight to transform the entire terminal. Passengers who had quietly recorded the encounter lowered their phones. Others simply stared in disbelief. Tyler looked toward the judicial identification still resting on the table, then toward the official conference program bearing Andre's name, then back at the man who had repeatedly invited him to verify the truth before reaching a conclusion. For the first time that morning, Tyler realized the evidence had never been missing. He simply had not been willing to see it. No one spoke for several long seconds. The terminal that had been filled with quiet conversations only moments earlier now felt suspended in complete stillness. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on Officer Tyler Grayson, whose confidence had slowly dissolved into visible uncertainty. The certainty that had guided every decision that morning now stood in direct conflict with the undeniable reality before him. He looked once more at the judicial identification resting on the table, then at the conference program bearing Andre Washington's name, and finally at the distinguished group that had arrived from the courthouse. Every piece fit together perfectly. The only thing that had never fit was his own assumption. Chief Judge Harold Whitmore calmly picked up the credential holder and handed it back to Andre with both hands. "Your identification, Your Honor." Andre accepted it with a grateful nod before carefully placing it inside his jacket pocket. Rebecca Lawson gathered the scattered court documents and returned them to the leather briefcase, taking care to organize each folder exactly as she had found it. She then lifted the garment bag and gently zipped it completely closed before handing it back to Andre. "Everything appears to be here," she said quietly. Andre thanked her with a warm smile. Around them, several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The law student lowered her notebook, realizing she had just witnessed a lesson no classroom could have provided. The elderly veteran slowly removed his cap for a brief moment, not as a military gesture, but out of simple respect for the dignity Andre had maintained throughout the entire encounter. Linda Carter quietly instructed station employees to preserve the security camera recordings from every angle of the terminal. No one had requested it. She simply believed the events of the morning deserved an accurate record. Chief Judge Whitmore finally turned toward Tyler. His voice remained steady and free of anger. "Officer Grayson, our courts ask every citizen to seek facts before reaching judgment. We expect no less from those entrusted with public authority." Tyler swallowed hard, but found no immediate response. For the first time that morning, he noticed details he had ignored before. The official seal stitched into the robe. The authentic signatures on the conference documents. The patience in Andre's voice every time he had invited verification instead of confrontation. None of those facts had appeared suddenly. They had been present from the beginning. Tyler simply had not allowed them to matter. Several phones continued recording, but now the cameras captured something entirely different. They no longer showed a man defending his identity. They showed a respected judge quietly receiving the professional respect he had deserved from the very first moment he entered the station. Andre adjusted the handle of the garment bag before looking directly at Tyler. There was no satisfaction in his expression. No triumph. No desire to embarrass the officer in return. "Officer Grayson," he said gently, "every person you meet carries a story you cannot see. The law exists because appearances alone have never been enough." Tyler lowered his eyes. He realized that during the past hour, the only person who had remained consistently professional had been the man he had doubted. Chief Judge Whitmore glanced briefly toward the station clock. "Your Honor, if we leave now, you can still arrive before the ceremony begins." Andre nodded. "Then let us not keep those young judges waiting." As the judicial delegation prepared to leave, the crowd instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path through the terminal. Nobody had been instructed to move. Respect accomplished what authority never needed to demand. Tyler remained standing beside the security table, watching silently as Andre walked toward the exit, carrying the very robe that had been dismissed as nothing more than a costume. Only now did Tyler fully understand that a robe could never create integrity. It merely reflected the character of the person worthy enough to wear it by the time the motorcade reached the Virginia Judicial Conference. The opening ceremony had been delayed by nearly 20 minutes. Hundreds of judges, attorneys, law professors, and civic leaders remained seated inside the auditorium, quietly wondering what had prevented one of the state's most respected appellate judges from arriving on time. The moment Judge Andre Washington entered through the side doors, the audience rose to its feet almost instinctively. The applause was warm, genuine, and filled with admiration. Yet Andre acknowledged it with the same quiet humility that had carried him through the difficult morning. He took his place behind the podium, carefully setting his leather briefcase beside him before resting one hand lightly on the polished wood. Chief Judge Harold Whitmore stepped forward first. Without revealing every detail of what had happened, he addressed the audience with measured honesty. "This morning," he began, "Judge Washington experienced an unexpected delay while traveling here. I believe today's events have already reminded us that justice depends not only upon the words written in our laws, but also upon the discipline to seek truth before drawing conclusions." The room became completely silent. Harold then invited Andre to deliver the keynote address as originally planned. Andre adjusted the microphone and looked across the audience of newly appointed judges. Many smiled respectfully, unaware of everything that had unfolded less than an hour earlier. Others had already begun receiving messages describing the incident at the bus station. Andre could have spoken about his own experience. He chose not to. Instead, he spoke about responsibility. "Every person who enters a courtroom," he said, "deserves to be seen as an individual before they are seen as a case. Every decision we make begins long before we sign an order or announce a ruling. It begins with whether we are willing to listen." His voice remained calm, carrying effortlessly through the auditorium. Authority is never permission to assume. It is an obligation to verify. Several members of the audience quietly wrote those words into their notebooks. Meanwhile, back at the bus station, the morning had become unexpectedly quiet. Officer Tyler Grayson remained seated inside the security office, replaying every conversation in his mind. Linda Carter entered carrying a small envelope. "These are copies of the security recordings," she explained. "Court security requested that we preserve everything." Tyler accepted the envelope without speaking. He understood why the recordings mattered. They would not simply document what had happened. They would document every opportunity he had been given to verify the truth, and every moment he had chosen certainty over evidence. His supervisor soon arrived after receiving calls from both the department and the courthouse. The meeting was respectful, professional, and brief. Tyler was informed that an administrative review would take place to examine the events of the morning. No conclusions had yet been reached, but the facts would be reviewed carefully. Tyler nodded quietly. He did not argue. For the first time since beginning his career, he realized that accountability was not something reserved only for people standing before a judge. It also belonged to those wearing a badge. As the afternoon sun brightened the station windows, passengers continued boarding buses, carrying with them stories they would tell for years. Some would remember the respected judge who remained calm under pressure. Others would remember the officer whose assumptions unraveled in front of dozens of witnesses. But nearly everyone who had been present carried away the same lesson. Truth had never needed to raise its voice. It had simply waited patiently until every fact stood where everyone could finally see it. Several weeks passed before the administrative review reached its conclusion. Investigators examined the station security footage, reviewed the preserved recordings from witnesses, compared radio transmissions, and interviewed everyone who had been present that morning. The process was thorough because public trust demanded nothing less. Every timeline matched. Every conversation aligned. The evidence revealed that Judge Andre Washington had remained respectful, cooperative, and transparent from the very beginning, repeatedly offering opportunities for his identity to be verified through proper channels. The review also concluded that assumptions had been allowed to replace careful verification during a routine public encounter. Appropriate administrative actions followed according to departmental policy, accompanied by additional training designed to strengthen professional decision-making and reinforce the importance of impartial treatment for every member of the public. Judge Andre Washington never requested special consideration during the investigation. When asked whether he wished to make a formal public statement beyond the facts already established, he simply replied, "The record already speaks clearly enough." Those who worked beside him understood that response perfectly. Throughout his career, he had believed that justice gained its greatest strength not from dramatic speeches, but from consistent integrity. Months later, the story was still discussed inside classrooms, police academies, and continuing legal education seminars across Virginia. Professors asked students a simple question after showing portions of the publicly released footage. At what moment could this outcome have changed? The answers varied. Some said it changed when assumptions replaced questions. Others believed it changed when verification was dismissed before it was attempted. Many concluded that the outcome could have been different at almost every step because every conversation offers another opportunity to choose fairness over certainty. The law student who had witnessed the entire encounter eventually graduated near the top of her class. During her commencement speech, she shared a lesson that had never appeared in any textbook. "I learned that the strongest voice inside a room is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the person who remains calm long enough for the truth to arrive." Linda Carter continued managing the bus station, but she introduced one small tradition after that unforgettable morning. Every new employee received the same advice during orientation. Treat every traveler with dignity. You never know whose journey has brought them through these doors. The elderly veteran who had quietly watched the encounter wrote a letter to the judicial conference expressing admiration not only for Judge Washington's professionalism, but also for the restraint he had shown when he finally had every reason to respond with anger. Andre kept the letter inside his desk, not because it praised him, but because it reminded him that ordinary people notice extraordinary character. One crisp autumn morning exactly 1 year later, Judge Washington walked through the same bus station on his way to another community event. The building looked exactly as it had before. Travelers hurried toward departure gates. Coffee cups steamed beneath bright terminal lights. Children laughed while departure announcements echoed overhead. Andre paused for only a moment near the same station map where the previous year had taken such an unexpected turn. He smiled quietly before continuing toward his bus. Nothing about the station had changed, yet everything had. Somewhere nearby, another officer greeted passengers with patience instead of assumptions. Another young law student watched with fresh understanding. Another ordinary morning carried the possibility of extraordinary choices. Because in the end, a judicial robe is never what gives a judge authority. A badge is never what gives an officer honor. Titles may introduce a person. Uniforms may identify a profession, but character is revealed only when no one believes they are being tested. And that morning proved a truth that will always outlast appearances. Justice begins the moment we choose to see the person before we judge the story. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of justice.